Let's do a little bit on audio theory today. Let's talk about audio stems and how I view them in podcasting. Also, we'll talk about the different definitions that people use when talking about stems. Hi, it's Mike from Casefile and Casefile Presents. On this channel, I'm releasing videos on podcasting, so if you enjoy the content, you can hit the like button. First, what are stems in audio? Stems are submixes. So you got group of similar audio that are mixed together and bounced into a separate track. That makes it easier to do global changes within a project, like big cuts, or maybe update the project or insert a new scene, for example. It also gives you control over the remixes. So, for example, how I worked with stems in the past was when I was working on dubbings for movies. And that's where we had to work with stems to add new elements to the mixes, to the audio mixes. In music, stems are, I guess, used more for remixes. So, like you have a tracks and then remix of different artists. And when it comes to stems, you have lots and lots of different ones. So you can have effects stem, Foley stem, DST, which is dialogue stems, music stems, M&E, that's music and effects in one stem, options helpers. So it really depends on what you're working on. Stems, in terms of naming and what you use, will differ from project to project and the area that you specialize in. So in music, you'll have different kind of stems. In movies, you'll have different kind of stems. But we're talking about podcasting here, so what about podcasts? Do we use stems in podcast production? Well, it depends, because if you think about a standard sort of interview show, in reality you have like two people talking to each other, so two tracks, and then maybe an intro and outro. Let's say they're on the same track. In reality, you don't need to downmix that, and the session will be quite simple. So you can just finish the whole project within that session. The only thing that I can think of you could downmix would be those two dialogue tracks into one. So as you can see, there's really no point of doing that. On the other hand, if you're working on like audio drama, then stems may come in handy, because you might find yourself working with many different elements. So have your dialogue tracks, will have your backing sort of vocal tracks, then you'll have your music, your effects, and the sessions can become large. And as you approach the final mix, it may make sense to downmix these elements, so you end up with much cleaner session, which is easier to sort of control and make adjustments to. It also depends if there are other people that you're working with, especially in post-production. In my opinion, in podcasting, everything in between is fair play. There are no rules that you have to adhere to. It all depends on what you're working on and how complicated the session is, and if somebody else is expecting the deliverables. So in my sessions, I sort of use the mixture. I have single tracks and stems within the same session. Also, like I said at the beginning, the definition of the word stem can be sort of flexible. So sometimes I use word stem when I describe a single dialogue tracks if I'm working with someone else who's been editing dialogues. What do I mean by that? Let's say we had 10 people that were recorded. I will then say, well, can you send me the stems of these 10 tracks, which means the exported clips in just one track that matches the length of the episode. So each person would have that full export. So, and I will call that a stem, which is not really a stem in a classical sense, because the stem would mean a down mix of all dialogues into one track. But usually people are aware of that, and they do understand what the other person means when they say they need stems of all the dialogues. And that's how I usually work when it comes to dialogue. So, for example, for case file and other narrative style shows that I work on, I will keep dialogues on separate tracks, as single tracks, but I will down mix the music if there's musical bed I'm working on, because musical cues, there'll be 5, 6, 7 textures, 7 instruments that I mix to the narration and then bounce it down onto a single stereo track, which is a musical bed, which is a musical stem that I will then write automation on. So my session will be a mix between single tracks and stems. But let me show you in Pro Tools. Okay, so this is Searching for Sarah, a project that we've released on Spotify as Casefile Presents. And this session just will show you how I work with the mixture of stems and individual tracks. Now, I use these terms kinda with flexibility, because technically stems are mixdowns of all the tracks of the same kind. So you would have a dialogue stem, music stem, and so on. We've talked about it. But sometimes, like in this instance, Beck, who's a niece of Vicky Petritis, the host and narrator of this show, she was editing the dialogues. And when I asked her for the dialogues, I just said, just send me individual tracks, the stems of the dialogues, consolidated to the length of the session. And she sent me, again, a split tracks, so each person on separate track, the length consolidated the length of the episode. So technically there were not stems, they're just individual tracks, even though I called them stems. But I want to show you then how I kind of work. So as you can see, we got a dialogue track, so we got narration at the top, then we got various people that are included in this episode. Then some mix passes, and at the bottom these are instruments, so single textures of a theme that I then mix to the narration. So we got like keys, pads, and bass. So for example there, and if we look at automation, I then sort of write automation, mix it to that particular scene, and then I bounce it down to the score, which is a stereo track. Now, technically, this is the stem. So once I've done the mix down of the music of these tracks, instrument tracks, I bounce it to a stereo score, and then again I mix the episode with that stereo score track. As you can see, there's automation on it as well. So if we are talking in technical terms, that's the only stem I'm using in this session, actually, because this is the mix down of all these instruments. Everything else, there are single tracks. And if we were to bounce down all of these dialogue tracks there into one mono track or stereo track, that would be the dialogue stem, and we would just have then two tracks, music and dialogue. So for podcasting, I find, because again the sessions aren't as complex, they're not as CPU heavy as you would have in movies or music, I can do both. So I can have music stem, which is easier for me, especially when composing these type of soundtracks for podcasts, but I don't want to and I don't need to bounce down the dialogues onto one dialogue stem, because that I would lose flexibility, and I would lose that option of editing or adjusting on a go, even at the very last stage of my production. So I just want to show you again. So this was for Searching for Sarah, but I keep it similar to with other shows as well. Case file, obviously, will only have one narrator, so you just have one dialogue track. But then with the music, I'll do the same. So to have all these different instruments mixed down into a stereo stem, a stereo audio track. So I hope that sort of clears it up. As far as deliverables go, I'm at the end of the line, production pipeline for what I do now. So I didn't have to, and I don't really have to send my sessions to anybody else. So really, I'm not in a situation where I had to be prepping stems or deliverables for somebody else. But in my opinion, how I feel is that in podcasting, you really don't need to downmix dialogues. If you're working on some a little bit more involved projects, then maybe yes, do the submixes for music or sound effects. But essentially, the sessions are fairly simple, and we want them simple, but not simpler. We don't want to sort of think how can we make it more efficient. In reality, you can finish the podcast within that one session if you know how to organize your tracks, and like I said, down mix what you really think that you should be down mixing, but really not everything. And that's my view when it comes to podcasting. So I hope that this video was clear, and now you sort of understand my approach, and maybe the video gave you a few ideas how to sort out your session when you produce podcasts. But that's it for today. I'm Mike Migas. If you enjoyed the content, you can check the rest of my channel. For now, you can share, like, or subscribe, and I'll see you later.